Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome inside the latest edition of Across the Cavs. We've got Zack Meisel, longtime beat writer for the Cleveland Guardians, long before they changed the name. He's written for them for three different outlets. Going into Zach, I want to say correctly, this is year 15 for you coming up.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to keep publicizing that. The number keeps getting bigger and bigger, and I'm just feeling older and older.
Uh, as time goes, when you started, correct. I think Jim Tomei, who was the Cleveland Legend, I think he was still playing baseball. I think it might have been
Yeah.
in Baltimore at that point or Philadelphia again.
I mean, it's crazy when I saw we just had the Baseball Hall of Fame uh, ballots revealed, and then you start thinking about next year. And there was a name on there that kind of stopped me on my tracks because I covered this guy from my first season in this industry until his retirement, and that's Jason Kipnis. And now he's on the Hall of Fame ballot. You have to wait 5 years after you retire to land on the ballot. So that's when it sunk in. Like, we've been doing this a little too long, I think.
Yeah, no, and well, certainly going to see how many more Clevelanders get in. And I know, Zach, we'll start here. I know he was before your time in Cleveland, but you did see him with the Yankees for a while. What was it like, for you growing up in Ohio to see CC Sabathia, who spent his first 8 seasons with Cleveland, get into the Hall of Fame?
What was cool is I never covered him as a player in Cleveland. I remember interviewing him once when the Yankees were in town about his Cleveland days. And then when he came back last summer, the Guardians inducted him into their Hall of Fame. And look, I know there's a lot of people maybe upset that he's going in with the Yankees cap, and he was outwardly vocal about rooting for the Yankees in the playoffs last year. But he does have a lot of fond memories about Cleveland and about how it shaped him and set him up for success in his career. So it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other, New York versus Cleveland here. He's appreciative of his time and certainly has some regrets and disappointment about his performance in the 2007 playoffs too. But it's just such a real person. Like he's always been so candid and genuine, and so you appreciate that. And it was pretty cool just seeing his reaction too to getting elected. Like he fired off a bunch of tweets where it felt like he was a fan of the Hall of Fame and baseball and sports. Like he was just like one of us. So that was pretty cool.
Certainly a memorable career. He was one of those many great Cleveland starters in that mid to late 2000s, along with Cliff Lee, the infamously named Fausto Carmona, who had a good season of his own. Took home the '07 Cy Young, made 3 All-Star games in Cleveland, and the one monstrous 440-foot home run as well, and then went on to be a 3-time All-Star World Series champion with the Yankees, where he did pitch the next 11 seasons. But Zach, we go back to the beginning here, and for you, is I was doing some research before we got on, because in my notes I wanted to talk about how you got into sports, and I couldn't read the whole story. But from what I found, when you're in third grade, you're watching baseball and you're seeing Randy Johnson just chucking one down to Kenny Lofton at the plate. How did that kind of help you? And you started writing about it. So how did your early words as a third grader kind of guide you into your early interest in wanting to cover sports and have your words read, by fans all around?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way that as an 8-year-old I knew what journalism was or sports writing, but I can trace back like maybe the interest to I think it was April of 1998, and the Mariners were in town, and I was at Jacobs Field, and Randy Johnson threw a fastball near Kenny Lofton's head, or I think he threw a slider first near his head, and Kenny Lofton didn't like it, and Randy Johnson's telling him it was a slider. I'm not trying to hit you. If I wanted to hit you, I'd throw a fastball, and then he did. He threw a fastball by his head, and the bench is clear, and there's this huge brawl, and I was this kid who, baseball was my first love, and it was easy with the '90s Indians. That team was so much fun to follow, and so I got to school the next day, and I remember we had just had some writing assignment in class, And I was like, well, I want to write about what I witnessed last night. That was unbelievable to me. I'd never seen anything like that. And so, look, did that launch a sports writing career? No, but that memory stands out to me. And it was always just my main passion is watching sports. Wasn't good enough to play it in any consequential way. So why not just write about it and describe what I'm seeing and describe the drama and the personalities and all of that. So, um, now I can claim whether it's a little embellished or not that I've known I wanted to do this since I was in third grade.
And obviously, Zach, you went to Ohio State, got to do a lot of great things, and we're going to get to that. But what was the bridge, if you will, between getting that first taste with the words of the benches clearing brawl in '98 to kind of getting to college and starting to make a career out of it? What happened in the intermediate years for you?
I think it was just always keeping in the back of my mind that, like, I knew I could write, and I didn't want to do anything as a kid but watch or play sports. So how can I meld those two interests together? And I remember, I was on the high school newspaper staff, but there was I think it was like 8th grade. There was another kid and myself, and we kind of like we had this class at the end of the day every day where we could just goof off and do whatever we wanted. So we put together our own sports section all the time, and we would have like I don't know if they were columns we would write, but just whatever thoughts came to our mind about sports, we would write like little articles. And I remember we would always be ranking the college basketball team. So it was just I have no idea what I would do if I wasn't doing this. And I think that's always been the case.
And so then we skip ahead a little bit. So from your 8th grade paper up to Ohio State, so what were your 4 years like, would you say, from a journalistic point of view? And then what would you say was your favorite moment while you were there?
Yeah, I
If there was.
remember I'll never shake this, but I remember this journalism advisor um who was in the business, who was a sports writer. Had no affiliation to Ohio State, but I remember him telling me when I was at Ohio State and I was just picking his brain on, how can I make it in this business? And, there's not there used to be a clear path decades ago where you would get out of college and you would go write for like your hometown paper, a tiny paper. You'd cover high school sports and you'd very gradually work your way up. And the goal was whatever the biggest paper in your area was. You'd go from the tiniest paper to a medium paper to a big paper, and then maybe you get some national gig somewhere. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. And it was already starting to not really exist in that capacity when I reached that point. And I remember this guy telling me that I'd never make it because I was at Ohio State. And Ohio State didn't have this prestigious journalism program like Columbia or Missouri or Northwestern. And I remember saying, like, okay, that's fine. Like, I mean, I'm not transferring, so I'll just have to prove that I have what it takes. And I look back and it's so funny because look, those prestigious programs are great and you get a lot of great experience. And they have, like, I know Northwestern's program, you get connections where they're putting you in positions where you're gaining great experience. But I know that at Ohio State, I covered a Sweet 16, a Final Four, Big Ten championship game, a Fiesta Bowl, a Rose Bowl, an Orange Bowl, a Sugar Bowl, a huge scandal. Like, I'm covering future NFL players. I'm covering college football Hall of Famers. Like, that's the experience. Like, that's what prepares you for the rest of your career. And I don't know that I could have gotten that at Columbia. So that stuck with me, and maybe it motivated me a little bit. But the industry is all about the experience and networking. And if you can cover, all of that stuff that I got to cover in 4 years, then nothing's going to be too daunting.
And obviously you stuck with it. We talked at the beginning. You don't want to admit the number anymore, but year 15, we're at the point we can start naming random players' jersey numbers to describe how long you've been covering, Cleveland baseball. So how did you get started though? So, from Ohio State, first year out, you did get the opportunity to cover the team through MLB.com, one of 3 different outlets you've been with, obviously now with the Athletics since 2017, as most know. How did you get your first foot in that door? And then obviously you stayed in that door and still find it.
Yeah, MLB.com used to have the best internship program, I think, in sports, where they would have 30 interns, one for each team, and you'd basically spend the summer shadowing the beat writer. And it's incredible experience. You're doing everything that they're doing. You're in the clubhouse interviewing people, you're writing game stories, notebooks, features, whatever. And unfortunately, I don't think they have it anymore. But it was fantastic. So I was fortunate enough, you don't always get a say in where you wind up. I was fortunate enough to wind up with the Cleveland gig, and was able to parlay that into a full-time job with them. So I didn't know that I didn't have plans to just go into baseball and stick with that for a long time. But it was a really, really beneficial first job. It gave me tools just in beat writing and learning how to report and interview people, just skills that I would need for the rest of time.
And before we dive into talking about the actual state of the Cleveland Guardians and then of the Cavs and of Cleveland as a whole, you took that path, you mentioned. So, to someone that wants to kind of get into doing what you want to, covering a team as their career, becoming a journalist, whether in sport or even in another area, what would you say, they should do to kind of get there? And what would you recommend?
This is the most difficult question for me because it's changed so much, and I feel like I have less and less of a grasp on what the answer is. I almost think you need to go rogue. I almost think the best way to do it is to do it on your own and not like there are so few outlets that are legitimate outlets that are looking for someone to cover a team and are hiring, right? I think that the key thing you need to try to answer is what can I provide that nobody else can? You know, how can I get people to, the Cavs pull off a huge trade? How do I make it so that when that moment happens and you see the alert that says that they acquired Cam Johnson, how do I rewire people's brains so that they're saying, all right, I need to go to them. I want to see what they have to say about this. So that's the ultimate answer. So how do you get there? And I almost wonder if like the way to do it is whether it's on YouTube, whether it's a podcast, whether it's Twitter, like find your platform and just hone it there. And like I don't know that you can do it the way it used to be where it's, well, let me go cover high school sports for small paper and then work my way up. I don't think that path exists anymore. Or if it does, it's pretty rare. So I think you need to just prove your value or prove your whatever it is, your analysis, your, if it's X's and O's, or if it's breaking news, if it's whatever it is, somehow you have to get on people's radar and prove to them that you have something indispensable. You have something that they covet. And then you build enough of an audience, you train people to um, just appreciate what you have to offer to the point where whatever outlet is hiring, or maybe you've built your brand up enough where, it becomes a career. But if there's an outlet hiring, like they know who you are, they can see the platform you've built. Like, and I'm stumbling over my words a little bit here because this is such a tricky thing these days. And I think everybody gets what they want in a different medium. There are people who don't read anything I write, but listen to my podcast. There are people who don't know I have a podcast and they're just waiting for my next article. There are people who, look strictly to YouTube to devour whatever sports appetite they have. So it's so different now, and it's always evolving and changing too, and I don't really know where it's gonna go. Um, so I think you just have to find your own niche and just kind of prove that you're an instrumental part of whatever you want to be.
And on that note, Zach, with the transition of your early time covering, the Cleveland Indians in 2011, what did you kind of look to as your style when you first began to kind of help yourself stand out once you got in?
Yeah, I always knew the thing I was most interested in writing. Like back then we're writing game stories in notebooks, and it didn't take long for I think the industry to realize nobody wants to click on a 600-word story about Evan Mobley's sprained ankle. They saw the tweet or the notification on their phone that he has a sprained ankle, right? So um, I realized like I don't want to do the meat and potatoes, the nuts and bolts, and you have to do some of that stuff when you're getting your foot in the door. But I was interested in the people. I was interested in we're watching all these athletes on TV, and it's very easy to fall into the trap that these guys are robots and they should perform up to expectations all the time. And um, especially I think in baseball and basketball, the seasons are so long. It really is a journey, and I think a lot of fans want to feel like they know these people. And so human interest features have always been kind of my bread and butter, and building those relationships so that the athlete trusts you enough to tell you their story and to let their guard down so that then I can relay that to the fans, and you feel like you're sitting there and what Darius Garland is thinking as he's stepping up to the free throw line, or so that's I knew pretty early on that those are the stories I wanted to tell. What guys have been through, what their motivations are, what makes them tick, all of that. And I think a big thing for me too is just cherishing the fact that I have access and not wanting to take that for granted. So, I'm in the locker room, I'm in the clubhouse, I'm in the dugout before games. I have the privilege of being around these guys, getting to know them. I should take that and I should let fans and my readers and listeners in on that and let them come along for the ride too. So that's just always been important to me.
And yet, Cleveland had a very impressive season. They were 3 wins away from the World Series this past year, in the first year under Stephen Vogt, first-time manager. 11 years of Terry Francona, you go right to Stephen Vogt, and you turn that right to an ALCS appearance. What were the vibes around the team like this past season compared to, the Francona regime, which hailed for over a decade in Cleveland?
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels with the Cavs. And in terms of it's a group that really likes each other, loves playing together. You feel like if one guy has an off night, there are other guys who want to make sure that they step in. And you don't get that a ton in sports these days, I feel like. And also just the fact that like the Guardians went out and they started on the West Coast. I think they went 7-2 and they never looked back. And they never do that. They always, under Terry Francona, they'd always start slow. They'd be around 500 near the All-Star break, and then they'd turn it on the second half. And that's like, it doesn't matter how you get there, but there's something to be said about taking your fans on a ride from start to finish. And they were in first place, I think, every day of the season except 6. And most of those 6 were at the beginning. So it was like that honeymoon phase of an unexpected great year. Like that's when things are great. It's fleeting. Like it doesn't last. The Cavs are in that period right now, and it's fun because it was so unexpected because they didn't change much, but the coach, right? So
Yeah, that's right.
and that's kind of how the Guardians were. They changed the manager, and that was about it. But things clicked, and there was a lot of camaraderie. And so the vibes were really high from start to finish, and it's just so rare to have that.
And, all postseason, there was something going on, whether it was Lane Thomas hitting yet another grand slam. Every guy seemed to deliver at least one big moment at the plate. Of course, none bigger in the ALCS. The series shift to Cleveland, and things looking a little dire. Crazy, crazy game. Where you have to rally, and then you go down again, and then John Kenty, Noel, Big Christmas, crazy, monster shot to close things out. So, where does that moment for you rank? Yes, I'm not asking you to rank a whole Mount Rushmore here because I want to focus on this one moment. But where does that kind of rank for you in your 14 plus seasons, we'll call it?
So I think there have been 3 times. I might be forgetting one, but I can think of 3 times when something has happened and I've been stunned. And usually something happens and back in previous stops, like if there's a walk-off home run, I got to write a game story immediately. And so I remember Tyler Naquin hit an inside the park walk-off homer in 2016. And I didn't know what to do. It was the first time I've ever sat there just staring at my computer screen, like jaw on the floor. I don't have words for this. What am I supposed to write? I think it was the first time that happened in 100 years. And then obviously a couple months later, the Rajai Davis home run. That was obviously, that they didn't win. So that moment isn't what it could have been. It could have been the most incredible moment in baseball history, right? But
Yeah.
that was another one where because of the matchup, you're facing Aroldis Chapman, who's maybe at the peak of his powers, and Rajai Davis is farthest thing from a home run hitter, and you're just stunned, and you're like listening into the crowd and like trying to, when there's a big moment, when there's a walk-off homer, and there's like it's, what that noise sounds like, but like that was different, and the Noel one was like that. It's different. There's everything about that moment, like, it's a great moment when you can replay it in your head. I don't need to be sitting here watching the YouTube video to know every single element of it, to know how cool he looked and how he just drops the bat, head down, deliberate walk toward first base, like he wasn't surprised. The trot around the bases, like everything about it was brilliant, and the crowd was just insane. So those are the 3. The Naquin one is beneath the others. That one was more for the fact that I've never seen that happen. I've never seen anything like that. But those 3 moments, those are the 3 times where it was, and like we all, like Noel was swinging for the fences. He's not going up there. You're not asking him to like, hey, try to slap a single down the line to keep this game going. Right. But still, I think it was just because of the contact he makes. Like he doesn't hit any that land in the front row of the bleachers. It's flirting with the scoreboard. So I don't know. It's just a thing of beauty. And it's one of those moments where like you can replay it over and over again, and you're still going to think it's the coolest thing you've seen all day.
Yeah, obviously, whether you're taking that in person, you listen to Rafa Hernandez Brito's call in Spanish, you listen to Brian Anderson, you listen to Tom Hamilton, every call, watching it over and over. One of the things that doesn't get old, it goes without saying that it was an unbelievable first season despite losing 4-1 in the ALCS. When you can have a moment like this that can kind of be that capstone of an incredible run. And so, talking about the vibes as you were, and a lot of cities are going to have people in different places have a biased answer to this. But I think you're a very credible source being around for so long and covering to so many different spots with the team. Is Cleveland the greatest sports city?
So, yeah, I feel like I have hopefully a good perspective on this. I have buddies who a decade ago, 15 years ago, every day they're asking me like, when are you going to just go national and get a national gig? And, no matter what the sport is, just write about all the teams in that sport. And the hardest thing for me was I remember talking to someone once, and I think they were a New Yorker, and they'd covered New York teams for a while, and then they wrote about maybe it was like a Mariners player, a Phillies player, or something, and nobody knew who this writer was, and so they're like, "Why? What do we care? Like, we don't know you." And like, there are certainly, my title now is a national writer, but I live in Cleveland. I don't want to leave Cleveland because it is, where can you find a city that is small enough but still has all three sports teams? You know what I mean? Like the big markets, the Yankees are never going to have a season like the Guardians just had, where it's a thrill ride from start to finish and it's an unexpected honeymoon era, right? Like the Lakers aren't going to have a season like the Cavs are having right now, because you have every year it's championship or bust. And if it's not, it's you can win games in fun ways in the NBA in December and January. But if you're one of those other teams, it's like, who cares? Wake me up in June. And if you're not there, I'm pissed. And in baseball, it's the same way, right? And all of that said, like, we should still have high standards in Cleveland. And it's, I'm objective as a reporter, but I'm also from here, and I also know that when the teams are good, it's more fun to cover them. Fans are more engaged, and we can stop cursing about quarterbacks and offensive line coaches or whatever. Like, it's so therapeutic that the Cavs are having the season they're having, given where the Browns are at right now. And it was therapeutic that the Guardians had the season that they had, to get us from the Cavs' disappointment in the playoffs through Browns' disappointment and get us back to a new Cavs season. So I just think it's a smaller city that has the charm, because you just feel that connection and that passion and that loyalty from fans, because these are the three teams that they care about. And, that loyalty is just unwavering. And at the same time, like, thank God we have three teams. Like, it's awesome. There are a lot of cities of similar size or even bigger that have one or two. And so I think Cleveland has the perfect setup, for a sports writer. There's never a dull moment. There's so much to write about. And the fans, they're as loyal as it gets. That's all we could want as sports writers.
When you talk about the Cavs, 36-7, obviously on very tough loss to Houston the other night. That aside, best in the East. Kenny Atkinson, after Boston's 21-point loss to the Lakers last night, becomes the head coach. He's the fourth coach in Cavs history, joining Mike Brown, Lenny Wilkins, and Ty Lue to be an all-star coach. What have you taken away, Zach, from this team's incredible start, in which you talk about the thrill ride? No one expected them to go 36-7, maybe 30-17 at best, 28-19, just pick up where they were last year, but they've been top dogs from day one.
The most impressive thing to me is it's so easy, especially in like November and December, to just, all right, we played last night. Now we got a back-to-back and we're at Indiana, and maybe we'll take our foot off the gas and we'll lose. And it doesn't matter. A loss in November, December is not going to be something you're thinking about in May. And yet they have not taken their foot off the gas. And it's not because, Donovan Mitchell's not playing 40 minutes a night. Like, they've got this down perfectly. And I think the chemistry's been, it's just like you feel it through your TV screen. And it looks like the confidence too. And I think about the Guardians last year and how, coming out of spring training, like, people were saying they would win like 80 to 85 games, maybe. Like, no one really knew what to expect of that team. They get off to a good start, and I think they were able to buy into themselves, and they kept that going. And I think they were like 16-6 at one point, and then you just keep that up because you gain confidence. You gain you have these new coaches saying like, hey, we believe in you and we can win the division and this team's going to be good. And you're like, okay, maybe, but like, we won 76 games last year and it's pretty much the same group of guys. So they believe in themselves as they got going. I think it's the same with the Cavs, where it's like they probably were disappointed after the Boston series and they felt like they could accomplish more, But when you get off to, when you're 15-0, it's like, well, you believe that you can beat any team in the league. And I think when you play with that belief and you like the people you're playing with, I think that can take you pretty far.
And, it's been a complete team effort from them this season. Everyone's contributed. A number of guys have been on. Evan Mobley's now missed the last 3 games. It could be 4. It will be 4 at the end of today. So this is the question everyone's asking. This is the one everyone wants to know, whether they're a fan, a writer, whether they're with the team, whether they cover the team, whether, they're just somebody that likes basketball. But do you, in your opinion, Zach, think that the Cleveland Cavaliers should have 4 All-Stars this season?
So I don't know about 4. I would say, I mean, it's a good, you'll have Atkinson coaching, Mobley or Mitchell and Garland, I think, will make it. Mobley, I think, should make it. My only plea would be that if there's if it's a question between, if maybe 2 players are on equal footing and you're trying to decide who deserves it, the tie break should go to the Cavs, right? They should get the benefit of the doubt here. And I was thinking back because I remembered it was a decade ago when the Hawks had 4 All-Stars, and
Yep.
it was was it Teague, Millsap, Korver, and somebody else
Perfect.
on that. Yeah. And that team won 60 games, but nobody really thought that they were, they were a really good regular season team and a medium threat in the playoffs. And it feels like this Cavs team is far more capable than that team. So it's almost like that Hawks team set an unfair precedent where if that team got 4 All-Stars, yeah, this Cavs team probably should too.
It's kind of like that 05-06 Pistons team where I look back at the numbers. Ben Wallace was incredible. There really isn't a Ben Wallace in today's game to put up 5 points, 13 rebounds, 3 blocks, 2.5 assists, steal. That doesn't exist. I don't even know how you quantify that as all-star today when everyone wants to see points and rebounds. The crazy thing with that Hawks team, they did not have a 20-point per game score. None of them averaged a double-double. I think the record was, I was looking back, they were 27 or 8 games over 500 at the break. The Pistons were similarly great, but, it's certainly going to be fun to follow, see what exactly happens with them. Do they get the 4? And so, final question here, Zach, before we wrap up. I want to go back a little bit. So we talk about the Browns' struggles and the Cavs kind of carrying, through the fall now into the winter. But it seems to be over the years, and especially true in 2016, where you almost went from no titles in the city for 6 decades to nearly getting 2 in the span of 5 months. When the Cavs were able to come back on the Warriors and the Indians just falling to the Cubs in that second game. So do you find truth in the claim that when one of the Guardians or Cavs is playing well, maybe a little less the Browns, given that they've had some tough years in the middle, that when one of the Guardians or Cavs plays well, the other tends to follow suit?
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Obviously, the 16 year was just insane, right? That the city was on a 52-year professional championship drought. It's just absurd. And then the Cavs win and the Indians are right there on the doorstep of it. It was like they were due. They were making up for 5 decades of ineptitude. But I think, I don't know, maybe there's something to be said. I think Chris Antonetti and Kobe Altman, I think they talk occasionally, and I'm sure they share ideas. And, the Cavs are so much more stable as an organization than they were a decade or 15, 20 years ago. And I think there's a lot to be said for that too. There were risks involved in keeping this together and just changing the coach, right? It's worked out in their favor, of course, but no one really knew how this would work this season. And I think there's a lot to be said about having that stability and having the people in place and learning from failure, having a chance to fail and examine why you failed and then work to correct that. And I feel like in the NBA and the NFL, you very rarely get that opportunity. It's usually 2 or 3 years. It doesn't work out. Okay, let's move on to the new regime. And the Guardians, and I'm not saying it's a perfect strategy. The Guardians have had a ton of stability. Sometimes maybe too much stability for a quarter of a century. But I think you can learn and you can try to find the balance there. And I think these teams have done a really good job of that. And it certainly makes things feel better when both teams are clicking because they kind of stretch the calendar. And so there's not really a lull where you're pining for the next season to start. So I think that helps too. And that's, it's why Cleveland's such a great sports city. Like, you can have one team be a dumpster fire in town, and there are two other teams to try to pick you up.
Yeah, very well said, Zach. And as we wrap up, really great hearing from your perspective, all about your time getting to the Guardians and covering baseball and weighing in on the Cavs and kind of just understanding, and it just goes without saying that all these guys that you cover and all these athletes, that we watch them, we love them, and then there's the human interest side where they're also just people. Writing those stories allows us to connect with them, and so I want to appreciate you for stopping by. And if you don't mind, yes, everyone knows we can find you at The Athletic, which is where your current work is, but where else can we see Zack Meisel's work and his podcast and what else he has going on coming up?
Yeah, on The Athletic, the Selby is Godcast, wherever you get your podcasts, for some Guardians talk. And I have a book coming out. I don't know. I haven't really mentioned this anywhere. It's an updated version of it's 100 things every Guardians fan should know and do before they die. So an updated version of that. I wrote the original one 10 years ago. Lots happened with that franchise in 10 years. I think that's out March 1st, maybe.
Congratulations.
And let me just say, like, I don't do a ton of Cavs coverage. That could change here moving forward a little bit, but I have vivid memories of sitting on my living room sofa watching DeJuan Wagner and Sagana Diop and Trajan Langdon and Lamont Murray and Wes Person, and a lot of nights I feel like built some character. I have some battle scars there from suffering through some wretched basketball, and so it's been a lot of fun, 25 years later, watching this group just mesh and captivate the city too. It's been a brutal winter in Cleveland, so it's nice when if you can't get outside, at least you can turn on a Cavs game and they're usually up by 25.
May that statement, may those words ring true for the remainder of the year. But Zack Meisel, make sure to check out his upcoming book, 100 Things Guardians Fans Should Do Before They Die. Looking forward to that future Cavs coverage. We will see you all next time on Across the Cavs, Network 216. Catch you next time.